Have you ever really stopped to think about what money actually is? I mean, is it that piece of paper in your wallet? Is it the numbers that flash up on your banking app? Or is it something else? Well, the answer is a wild 5,000-year journey. And trust me, it tells us a lot more about ourselves than you might think.
See, it all boils down to one huge question. Is money a thing or is it an idea? Is it a commodity, something physical, like a gold coin that's valuable all on its own? Or is it just credit, a social promise, nothing more than a record of who owes what to whom, like an entry in a ledger? This tension, this constant dance between physical stuff and abstract trust, is really the engine that has driven the entire history of money.
So to really get it, we're going to hit 6 key moments in this story. We'll start by busting the whole myth of barter. Then we'll see how the very first coins came to be. We'll uncover the secret codes of medieval bankers, watch credit literally turn into paper, and then witness the exact moment all money broke free from gold. And finally, we'll see how that ancient ledger has now gone completely digital.
Okay, so where does the story of money usually begin? With barter, right? The classic caveman story.
Yeah, we've all heard this one, made famous by Adam Smith. You know the drill. To get what you want, you've got to find someone who not only has it, but also wants exactly what you're offering. It's called the double coincidence of wants, and on the surface, it seems like a pretty logical place to start. But here's the twist. It's a great story, but it's just that, a story. Anthropologists have searched for decades to find a society that was purely based on barter, and they've come up empty. Turns out early human economies didn't work like that at all. They ran on social credit. You helped your neighbor, and guess what? They owed you one. It was all just a big, complex web of favors and social debt.
In fact, the first real money wasn't a coin or anything you could hold. It was just an entry on a ledger. Check this out. Way back in ancient Sumer, temple accountants came up with this brilliant system. They basically said, okay, 1 big measure of barley is worth 1 shekel of silver. Now, farmers paid their debts and got their food in barley, the actual grain. But everything, and I mean everything, was recorded on these clay tablets in silver. And here's the kicker. Step 4. The actual physical silver almost never moved. Money was already an idea, a record of debt, right from the start.
And if you think that's abstract, let's go to one of my favorite examples of money in all of history, the Ray stones from the island of Yap.
These things were huge limestone wheels, some weighing tons, way too heavy to just carry around. So how do they spend them? Simple. The whole community just got together and agreed that, yep, ownership has changed hands. The ledger was just their shared memory. There's this incredible story about a huge rye stone that sank to the bottom of the ocean while being transported. But because everyone knew it was down there and they knew who owned it, it was still used in deals for generations. It just proves this fundamental point. Money isn't about what you can physically hold, it's about what we all agree has value. It's a shared belief.
So, that raises a pretty big question. If credit and these shared ledgers worked so well, why did we ever switch to carrying around little pieces of metal? Well, the invention of coins has the answer.
Well, think about it. Credit is awesome when you're dealing with your neighbors, people you know and trust. But what happens when you need to trade with strangers from faraway lands? Or pay soldiers who don't care about your village's social credit system? Having to weigh out little bits of silver and test if they're pure every single time you buy something? It's just a massive pain.
And that's where coinage comes in. It was basically a technology upgrade. Around 630 BCE, in a place called Lydia, a king had a brilliant idea. He stamped his royal seal on a piece of metal. That stamp was basically a guarantee saying, I promise this is the real deal and it weighs what it's supposed to. Suddenly, you could count your money instead of weighing it. Game changer. And what's wild is that a similar thing happened all the way over in China, where money grew out of the shape of tools, eventually becoming that iconic round coin with a square hole that they used for 2,000 years.
But you know, history's kind of a cycle. Carrying around heavy, jingling bags of metal is also pretty risky. So as time went on, that pendulum started to swing back again, away from the physical commodity and back towards abstract credit.
Yeah, just try to put yourself in the shoes of a medieval merchant. You're in Florence, but you need to buy wool in England. How do you get your money all the way up there? The roads are crawling with bandits. Shipping a chest full of gold is basically like putting up a giant sign that says, "Please rob me."
So the Knights Templar came up with this genius solution. You could walk into their church in London, deposit your gold, and they'd give you a coded letter. Then you could travel to, say, Jerusalem, present that letter, and boom, you'd get your funds. They basically invented the world's first international banking network. It was like an ancient Western Union. They figured out how to teleport value without actually moving the physical gold.
This was a huge leap, but the next step in the evolution was even bigger. What if that letter of credit, what if the promise itself could become spendable money?
And that's exactly what happened in 17th century London. People would store their gold with goldsmiths to keep it safe, and they'd get a paper receipt in return. Well, it didn't take long for people to realize it was way easier to just trade the paper receipts instead of lugging the heavy gold around. And just like that, the European banknote was born.
But just like with coins, China was way ahead of everybody else. They invented government-issued paper money all the way back in the 11th century. But this also gave us our first and maybe most important lesson in how this can go wrong. Without being tied to a real, physical thing, later dynasties just couldn't resist the temptation to print more and more money to pay their bills. Eventually, it became worthless, leading to a total collapse and the world's first recorded hyperinflation.
So this tension, this tug-of-war between paper promises and a physical backing, it pretty much defined money for centuries, until one single day in the 20th century when that link was just severed. For good.
Okay, so after World War II, the global economy needed an anchor. The solution was something called the Bretton Woods system. Basically, the whole world pegged their currencies to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold at a fixed rate. The magic number was $35 an ounce. This meant any country, in theory, could knock on America's door and trade their stack of dollars for a stack of physical gold. But this created a massive, fatal paradox. See, for the global economy to grow, the world needed more and more US dollars. But the more dollars the US printed, the more everyone looked at the gold in Fort Knox and did the math. And the less they believed the US could actually back it all up. The very thing that made the system work was also the thing that was guaranteed to make it fail.
And the whole thing came to a head on August 15, 1971. President Nixon got on TV and announced he was closing the gold window. And just like that, with that one sentence, the entire world was suddenly on a system of pure fiat money, money backed by nothing more than the promise of the government that issued it. The pendulum had swung all the way back to credit. And once money was officially untethered from anything physical, its final transformation was pretty much inevitable. The ledger was about to go digital.
From here, the pace just exploded. You get SWIFT, which is really just a secure chat room for banks to tell each other they've updated their ledgers. Then credit cards put a personal credit ledger in literally everyone's pocket. PayPal came along and built a trust layer for money on the early internet. And then, in 2008, Bitcoin appeared. And it tried to solve a really old problem. How do you create a digital thing that can't just be copied and pasted, creating a sort of digital commodity? So this is kind of where we are now. We've got these different flavors of money, and each one gets its value from a different source of trust. With gold, you trust physics. It's hard to make more of it. With cash, you trust the authority of the government. And with something like Bitcoin, you're trusting the cryptography, the math. The issuer, the supply, the source of trust, they're all different, but they're all trying to do the same job.
Which brings us right back to where we started. After 5,000 years from clay tablets all the way to the blockchain, we still just have a ledger. It's just way faster, more complex, and of course it's digital. But that fundamental question is still here, and it's the debate that's going to define the future of money. Is this new digital ledger a system of credit, where we have to trust institutions? Or is it a new kind of commodity, where we only have to trust the code itself?